12,000 years ago, at a time when the last woolly mammoths still wandered across the frozen northern plains, a human being stood before a living tree and made a decision that should not have been possible. With nothing more than stone tools, patience, and belief, they transformed that tree into a god. Against every natural law of decay, against time itself, that god survived. What remains today is not a legend or a theory, but a physical object that can be measured, scanned, tested, and touched. And its existence quietly dismantles everything we thought we understood about early human civilization. Our journey begins far from deserts, temples, or golden sands. It begins in silence, cold, and darkness, in the waterlogged earth of central Russia. To grasp why this discovery is so extraordinary, we must first understand how the natural world normally erases the past. In nature, decay is not an accident, it is a rule. When a tree falls, microorganisms immediately move in. Bacteria, fungi, and insects dismantle its fibers, breaking complex organic structures back into soil. In a temperate forest, a fallen tree might survive a few decades before collapsing into nothing. In warmer, wetter environments, it disappears even faster. Wood is temporary. It is fragile. It is meant to vanish. Yet there are rare places on Earth where chemistry interrupts this cycle. Places where time slows down, where decay pauses, and where organic material becomes trapped in a kind of natural limbo. Peat bogs are one of those places. These wetlands are dominated by sphagnum moss, a plant that alters its environment in a profound way. As it grows, it releases acids into the water, lowering the pH and creating conditions that are hostile to most decomposing organisms. At the same time, the stagnant water lacks oxygen. This combination, acidity and oxygen deprivation, forms a natural preservation chamber. Wood does not rot. Flesh does not dissolve. The biological clock simply stops. In the late 19th century, no one was thinking about ancient history when this process revealed its secret. Around 1890, miners working in the Ural Mountains were digging not for artifacts, but for gold. Near what is now Ekaterinburg, they excavated an open-pit mine, slicing through thick layers of peat to reach the gravel below. On a cold January day, nearly 4 meters beneath the surface, their tools struck something solid. It was not stone. It was not metal. It was wood. What they pulled from the bog looked at first like a dark, water-stained log. But as layers of mud were washed away, intention became visible. This was not driftwood. A massive larch tree had been deliberately split, smoothed, and carved. A face stared back at them from the ancient grain. No one at the time understood what they were holding. The object was transported to a local museum and quietly stored away, labeled as an oddity, perhaps a few hundred years old, maybe the work of local indigenous peoples. For over a century it sat in silence. The real shock came only when modern science caught up. In 1997, researchers decided to apply radiocarbon dating to the wood. This technique measures the decay of carbon-14, a radioactive isotope absorbed by living organisms. Once a tree is cut down, it stops absorbing carbon-14, and the remaining isotope decays at a known rate. The result tells us when the organism died. When the lab results came back, they made no sense. The date suggested the wood was approximately 9,500 years old. The archaeological community pushed back immediately. Such a date conflicted with the established narrative of human development. According to conventional models, people of that era were small, mobile hunter-gatherer groups focused entirely on survival. They were not supposed to be building towering monuments. Critics argued that the test must be flawed, or that the inner heartwood of an old tree had been dated rather than the carved surface. The controversy stalled the discussion for decades. It wasn't until 2018 that a joint Russian-German team revisited the artifact using accelerator mass spectrometry, a far more precise method that counts individual carbon atoms rather than radiation. This time, samples were taken from the outermost layers of the wood, the part that was alive at the moment the tree was cut. The new results did not correct the date downward. They pushed it further back. The statue was approximately 12,100 years old. To understand the scale of this revelation, comparisons are unavoidable. This wooden monument is more than twice as old as the Great Pyramid of Giza. It predates Stonehenge by roughly 6,000 years. When the pyramids were being built, this statue was already ancient, older to the Egyptians than the pyramids are to us today. It was carved at the very end of the last ice age, before agriculture took hold in the region, before writing, before the wheel, and while mammoths still walked the Siberian plains. The survival of this object borders on the miraculous. Stone tools endure because stone does not rot. Bone sometimes survives. Wood almost never does. An estimated 99.9% of all wooden artifacts created by early humans have decomposed into nothing. This statue is a singular survivor, a lone representative of an entire lost world of biodegradable art and belief. Had it fallen just meters away from the chemical balance of that bog, it would have vanished thousands of years ago. The material itself tells a story of deliberate craftsmanship. The statue was carved from larch, a tree known for its dense, resin-rich wood. Scientists have counted its growth rings and determined the tree was at least 159 years old when it was cut down. This was not a fallen branch casually shaped. A massive ancient tree was selected, felled with stone tools, and worked while the wood was still fresh. The scale alone demands planning, cooperation, and time, resources we are told Ice Age people did not have. When the fragments were first assembled in the early 20th century, the statue stood over 5 meters tall, roughly the height of a 2-story building. Sadly, parts of the lower section were lost during the political upheavals of the last century. Today, the remaining structure is shorter, but historical drawings confirm its original height. This detail matters. Monumental scale forces us to reconsider long-held assumptions about early human societies. The traditional narrative suggests that large monuments only emerge after agriculture creates food surpluses and permanent settlements. According to this view, hunter-gatherers were too busy surviving to invest energy into massive symbolic projects. This statue destroys that assumption. It proves that people living in a harsh, post-glacial environment possessed the organization, stability, and cultural motivation to create enduring monuments, not from stone, but from the most fragile material imaginable. And this is only the beginning of the mystery. As researchers examine the surface of the statue more closely, they realized that its age and survival were only the outer layer of its importance. The true revelation was not simply that it existed, but what had been carved into it. This was not a crude or accidental object. It was deliberate, complex, and intellectually demanding. Every line had purpose. Every mark carried intent. At first glance, the statue appears simple, a tall wooden form crowned with a striking human face. The head is elongated, with hollow eyes and an open mouth, frozen in an expression that feels neither calm nor welcoming. But when archaeologists began scanning the surface using modern imaging technology, they discovered something unsettling. The figure was not alone. Hidden within the body of the statue were other faces, some clear, others abstract, emerging only when viewed from certain angles or under specific lighting conditions. In total, researchers identified 8 distinct faces carved into the wood. One dominates the top, while the others are distributed along the front and back of the body. These faces are not randomly scattered. They are arranged vertically, stacked one above the other, as though following a deliberate order. This arrangement immediately suggested a structured worldview, a layered understanding of existence. Across many ancient cultures, the universe is imagined not as a single plane, but as a vertical system. There is the upper realm of sky and spirits, the middle world of humans and animals, and the lower realm associated with ancestors, death, or unseen forces. The statue appears to physically embody this cosmology. The highest face commands authority, while the lower faces recede into abstraction, blurring the boundary between form and pattern. The body of the statue itself is shaped like a flattened plank, and its surface is covered in dense geometric carvings. Straight lines, zigzags, chevrons, cross-hatching, patterns that once seemed decorative now demand closer attention. In traditional societies, especially those rooted in forest environments, geometry is rarely meaningless. Shapes are symbols. Lines are narratives. Patterns are memory devices. Anthropologists have long recognized that zigzag motifs often represent water, danger, transformation, or journeys between realms. Crosshatching can signify boundaries or enclosures, the separation between the living and the dead, the known and the unknown. When these symbols are arranged in specific sequences, they stop being decoration and begin functioning as language. It is possible that this statue was never meant to be looked at in the way we look at art today. Instead, it may have been read. From top to bottom, face to face, pattern to pattern, the statue could represent a story, a creation myth, a lineage of ancestors, or a set of spiritual laws governing the community. What we see as abstract shapes may once have been instantly recognizable to those who shared the cultural code. Today that code is lost. We are staring at a 12,000-year-old message written in a symbolic language no one speaks anymore. The statue has become encrypted by time. What makes this even more unsettling is how familiar the structure feels. Similar symbolic systems appear thousands of kilometers away, carved into stone at sites like Göbekli Tepe in modern-day Turkey. That site, built around the same period, features towering pillars engraved with animals and abstract symbols. Despite the vast distance between them, both sites suggest that early post-Ice Age humans across Eurasia were experiencing a shared intellectual awakening, a sudden surge in symbolic thinking, ritual architecture, and cosmological storytelling. This challenges one of archaeology's most deeply rooted assumptions, that human culture evolved in a slow, linear progression from simple to complex. The statue suggests the opposite. Complexity appears suddenly, fully formed, immediately after the Ice Age ends. These people were not fumbling their way toward abstract thought. They were already there. Tool mark analysis adds another layer to this revelation. Under magnification, the surface of the wood reveals clear evidence of sophisticated craftsmanship. Archaeologists have identified the use of polished stone adzes to strip bark and flatten surfaces, stone chisels to define edges, and, most remarkably, beaver teeth used as carving tools. Lower beaver jaws, with their razor-sharp incisors still intact, were used to gouge deep grooves into the wood. This level of ingenuity speaks to an intimate knowledge of the environment. These people understood the properties of stone, bone, and animal anatomy. They selected tools not just for availability but for precision. The statue is not the work of improvisation. It is the result of a refined technological tradition. The existence of this object forces archaeologists to confront a powerful bias: survivorship bias. Our understanding of the Stone Age is shaped almost entirely by what survives. Stone tools endure. Wood does not. We call it the Stone Age not because stone defined these cultures, but because stone is all that remains. The statue suggests that wood may have been the primary medium of artistic and spiritual expression for tens of thousands of years. If that is true, then our picture of early humanity is catastrophically incomplete. Entire traditions, wooden monuments, carved totems, ritual architecture, may have existed everywhere and vanished everywhere except in rare chemical accidents like this bog. The statue may not be an anomaly. It may be the only survivor of something once common. The environment in which the statue was created supports this idea. Around 12,000 years ago, the world was changing rapidly. Glaciers were retreating. Forests expanded into former tundra. Animal populations shifted. Old prey species disappeared while new ones emerged. This was a time of uncertainty, instability, and transformation. In moments like these, humans turn to meaning. They build symbols to anchor themselves in a changing world. The statue may have served as such an anchor, a vertical axis in a landscape of transition. For at least a generation, it stood upright, exposed to the elements. Weathering patterns on the wood indicate that it remained standing for 20 to 50 years before falling or being placed into the bog. During that time, it would have dominated the forest. A towering figure rising from the flat terrain, visible from a distance. Children would have grown up beneath it. Elders would have told stories about the faces carved into its body. Rituals may have been performed at its base. It was not passive art. It was a presence. Some researchers believe it functioned as a territorial marker, a warning or declaration carved into wood. Others see it as a ceremonial gathering point, a fixed location for nomadic groups to reunite, trade, find partners, and renew social bonds. The base of the statue is tapered, suggesting it may not have been permanently fixed, but repositioned or moved for different rituals. Eventually it returned to the earth. Whether by accident or intention remains unknown. But its placement in the bog may not have been random. Across many ancient cultures, wetlands are seen as liminal spaces, thresholds between worlds. Objects deposited in bogs are often offerings. It is entirely possible that the statue was deliberately sacrificed, lowered into the water when its time had passed. The bog preserved it but also sealed it away. For 12,000 years, it lay hidden while civilizations rose and fell above it. Writing emerged. Empires formed. Religions spread. And all the while this wooden god waited. Its rediscovery is not just an archaeological event. It is a philosophical one. It reminds us that history is not what happened, it is what survived. And survival is often a matter of chemistry, not importance. As astonishing as this statue is, it is only the first crack in the story. It proves that our timeline is fragile, that our assumptions about early humans are built on absence rather than evidence. And as we move forward, we will see that this is not an isolated case. Because elsewhere, beneath the floors of ancient houses, entire communities buried their gods. In deserts, people burned forests to manufacture synthetic stone. On mountains, faces stare out from rock that may or may not have been carved by human hands. Armies vanish without explanation. And objects appear where they should not exist at all. The past is not quiet. It is whispering through gaps we have not yet learned how to hear. When we leave the frozen forests of northern Eurasia behind, we do not move forward gently in time. We leap across millennia and landscapes into an environment that could not be more different. The silence of the bog gives way to heat, dust, and blinding sunlight. Our next destination lies in the ancient Near East, on the edge of what would one day become a cradle of civilization. Here, humans made a decision just as radical as carving a god from wood. They chose to stop moving. On the banks of a river near what is now modern-day Amman, Jordan, lies the archaeological site of Ain Ghazal. Around 7250 BCE, this place was not a village. It was a phenomenon. While most Neolithic communities consisted of a few dozen families, Ain Ghazal exploded into a population of several thousand people. By the standards of its time, it was a megacity. This moment marks one of the most consequential turning points in human history. Humanity crossed a threshold. People began domesticating plants and animals, building permanent homes and reshaping the land to suit their needs. In doing so, they were not just changing their environment, they were rewiring their psychology. Living close together created pressures our species had never faced before. Disease, overcrowding, conflict, and the anxiety of constant social surveillance. And yet, amid this social experiment, the people of Ain Ghazal embarked on something even more unexpected. They became industrial chemists. In 1983, modern construction crews were carving a highway through the ancient site when their machinery exposed something impossible. What initially looked like human remains, limbs emerging from the soil, turned out to be something else entirely. Archaeologists halted construction and began excavation. What they uncovered was not a mass grave, but a cache of statues. These were not small figurines or symbolic tokens. They were nearly life-sized human figures standing upright, modeled with unsettling realism. Their bodies were pale, their features deliberate, and their eyes stared back with an intensity that felt deeply uncomfortable. To understand why these statues are so extraordinary, we must examine what they are made of. Not clay. Not stone. Lime plaster. Lime plaster is not a naturally occurring material. It is synthetic. To produce it, limestone must be quarried, crushed, and heated in kilns to temperatures approaching 900 degrees Celsius. This process, known as the lime cycle, requires immense energy. There was no coal, no oil, no gas. The only fuel available was wood. To reach and maintain those temperatures, the people of Ain Ghazal burned their forests. Once the limestone was transformed into quicklime, it became dangerously reactive. Adding water triggered violent chemical reactions, producing heat and converting it into a workable paste. This paste could be molded into shape. As it dried, it absorbed carbon dioxide from the air and turned back into stone. The statues were not merely sculpted, they were chemically engineered. The scale of this operation is staggering. These were not occasional artistic experiments. This was industrial production. Kilns had to be built. Fuel had to be gathered. Limestone had to be transported. Entire sections of the community were devoted to sustaining this process. Some environmental archaeologists believe that this obsession with plaster may have contributed directly to ecological collapse. The trees disappeared. Soil degraded. Resources dwindled. Humanity may have caused its first environmental disaster not for war, but for art. The statues themselves reveal extraordinary technical sophistication. Beneath the plaster, archaeologists discovered internal frameworks made of bundled reeds and twine, skeletal armatures that gave the figures structural stability. This is the same principle used in modern reinforced concrete. Organic material provided flexibility, while plaster provided rigidity. But the most haunting feature remains the eyes. The whites were made of plaster or chalk, polished smooth. The pupils were formed from bitumen, a black, tar-like substance derived from natural asphalt. Bitumen does not occur naturally at Ain Ghazal. It had to be imported, likely from the Dead Sea region, dozens of kilometers away. This implies trade networks, logistics, and intentional design. These figures were meant to see. Traces of pigment reveal that the statues were once painted. Red ochre highlighted features suggesting clothing, tattoos, or ritual markings. In life, these figures would have been luminous, white bodies glowing in dark interiors, eyes locked open, silently watching. Two types of figures were found: full-bodied statues and busts. The full figures stood about a meter tall, with stubby legs and flat torsos. Their feet were too small to support them independently, indicating they were meant to be planted or displayed within structures. The busts were even stranger. Many had two heads emerging from a single torso. Two faces. One body. This is where technology intersects with psychology. Producing lime plaster required enormous communal effort. The statues were expensive, not in money but in energy, time, and environmental cost. They were not decoration. They were central to the social system. At Ain Ghazal, people were living closer together than ever before. Traditional kin-based trust systems were breaking down. Anthropologists suggest that these statues functioned as social glue. Their creation forced cooperation. Their presence reinforced shared identity. They reminded people who they were and where they came from. Chemical analysis revealed something even more telling. The plaster used for the statues was identical to the plaster used for house floors. There was no separate sacred formula. The same material people walked on was used to create their gods. This suggests a worldview where the divine was not separate from the domestic. The house itself was sacred. Ancestors belonged inside it. But the system was unsustainable. As forests vanished, fuel became scarce. Later construction layers show declining quality. True lime plaster was replaced with marl, a naturally occurring lime-rich mud that required less energy. The technology regressed. The brilliance faded. And then the statues were buried. Not discarded. Not smashed. Buried. They were placed carefully in pits beneath house floors, aligned with intention, sometimes intentionally deactivated through controlled breakage. This was not destruction. It was ritual burial. In the Neolithic mind, images were not representations. They were embodiments. The statue did not symbolize an ancestor, it contained them. To dispose of it casually would have been unthinkable. Like a human body, it required ceremony. This practice connects directly to another ritual found at Ain Ghazal, the skull cult. Human skeletons were buried beneath floors, but the skulls were removed. These skulls were later recovered, remodeled with plaster and fitted with shell eyes. Faces were preserved. Identity was maintained. The statues appear to be extensions of this obsession. Where a plastered skull preserved an individual ancestor, the statues represented something larger: lineage, clan, or mythic origin. The two-headed busts may symbolize unity: two families, two groups, one shared future. Imagine living in such a house. Crowded, loud, no privacy. And beneath your feet, buried just below the floor, lay the wide-eyed ancestors. Watching, judging, remembering. This was social control carved into chemistry. Eventually, Ain Ghazal collapsed. Environmental exhaustion, climate shifts, and resource depletion forced people to abandon the megacity. They dispersed into smaller communities. The technology of monumental plaster sculpture vanished. Humanity would not build statues of this scale again for thousands of years. Progress is not a straight line. It surges forward, burns itself out, and disappears. What remains are hollow shells, reed cores turned to dust, plaster skin intact, staring at us across 9 millennia. Witnesses to a failed experiment in permanence. And as unsettling as these buried figures are, they prepare us for something even stranger. Because next, we leave enclosed houses and buried gods behind, and ascend into thin air, to a place where faces may not have been buried at all, but carved into the mountain itself. The mystery only widens from here. From the enclosed spaces of buried houses and hidden ancestors, the story now expands outward. The walls fall away. The ceilings disappear. We leave behind plaster, fire, and domestic ritual, and ascend into thin air where the landscape itself becomes the canvas. What awaits us is not hidden beneath floors or preserved by chemical accident. It stands exposed to wind, sun, and time, challenging not only archaeology but perception itself. High in the Andes of southern Peru, at an altitude where the air grows thin and every movement feels deliberate, lies a vast volcanic plateau known as Marcahuasi. The name means little on a map, but the experience of standing there defies easy explanation. The terrain feels unnatural, not because it is artificial but because it feels intentional. Scattered across the plateau are massive rock formations that appear uncannily familiar. Faces, animals, helmets, altars. Entire profiles emerging from stone as though the mountain itself is watching. The most famous formation is often called the Monument to Humanity. From a specific angle, a towering cliff resolves into a human face complete with a brow, nose, lips, and chin. Move a few meters to the side and the image shifts. Another face emerges. Shift again and it dissolves back into fractured rock. This instability lies at the heart of the mystery. Are these sculptures, or are they illusions created by erosion and the human mind? Geologically, Marcahuasi is composed of volcanic tuff and ignimbrite, rock formed from ash and debris blasted into the air by ancient eruptions. When these materials settled, they cooled unevenly, cracking and fracturing along natural lines. Over millions of years, wind, rain, freeze-thaw cycles, and solar heat exploited those fractures. Softer sections eroded faster than harder ones, producing strange pillars, overhangs, and silhouettes. Similar formations exist elsewhere in the world. Hoodoos in North America. Spires in Cappadocia. Stone forests shaped entirely by erosion. Geologists argue that Markwasi is no different. They point to a psychological phenomenon called pareidolia, the human brain's tendency to recognize faces even in random patterns. We see faces in clouds, figures in shadows, and expressions in rock. According to this view, Markwasi is not a gallery of ancient sculpture, but a mirror reflecting the human mind back at itself. And yet, there is a problem with that explanation. The density of recognizable forms at Markwasi is unusually high. Not one or two ambiguous shapes, but dozens within a relatively small area. Faces that resemble human profiles from different ethnic groups. Animals that match mythological symbolism found across Andean cultures. Helmets and headgear that appear intentional rather than coincidental. Statistically, this clustering strains the idea of randomness. There is also the issue of perspective. Many formations are only visible from precise vantage points. From those positions, the image snaps into clarity. Step away and it dissolves. Critics argue this proves illusion. Supporters argue the opposite, that this is evidence of design. If an ancient culture sought to modify natural rock formations rather than carve them from scratch, they would work with perspective and shadow, not against it. This practice is not hypothetical. Throughout Andean history, sacred rocks known as huacas were revered as living beings. The Inca and pre-Inca cultures often enhanced naturally shaped stones, subtly altering them to emphasize faces, animals, or symbolic features. The boundary between natural and artificial was intentionally blurred. The goal was not to dominate nature, but to awaken what was already there. At Markwasi, archaeological evidence confirms long-term human presence. Stone dwellings, burial towers, terraces, and ritual structures date from roughly 800 CE to the late pre-Columbian period. People lived here. They farmed below the plateau. They buried their dead in caves carved into the rock. They interacted with this landscape daily. The scale of some formations, however, complicates the argument. The monument to humanity rises nearly 25 meters high. If fully carved, it would represent a monumental labor investment requiring scaffolding, tools, and coordination. Yet no clear tool marks remain. The surfaces are weathered, smoothed by time, indistinguishable from surrounding cliffs. If human hands were involved, erosion has erased their fingerprints. This ambiguity leaves archaeology at an impasse. The rocks are undeniably natural in origin. The shapes are undeniably evocative. The question is whether ancient people merely interpreted them, or intentionally guided their final form. Into this uncertainty stepped a controversial figure in the mid-20th century, Daniel Russo. Russo was not an archaeologist by training. He was a Peruvian explorer, philosopher, and obsessive observer. He spent years living alone on the plateau, mapping, photographing, and cataloging the formations. Where others saw coincidence, he saw coherence. Russo proposed that Markwasi was not a natural accident, nor the work of local cultures, but the remnants of something far older. He believed the plateau was shaped by a lost civilization that predated known history, a culture he called the Masma. According to Russo, this civilization understood that humanity moves through cycles of catastrophe. Floods, climate collapse, cosmic events, forces that periodically reset civilization. Knowing their end was approaching, the Masma sought permanence. They carved their message not into wood or clay, but into the mountain itself. Russo argued that the faces represented different branches of humanity, preserved together in stone as a message to future survivors. A declaration that all people shared a common origin. He claimed to identify multiple faces within single formations, revealed only as the sun moved across the sky. In his view, the mountain was not a sculpture, it was a time-activated archive. Mainstream archaeology rejects Russo's conclusions. There is no evidence of a lost global civilization with the technology to sculpt mountains. And yet, his work highlights something archaeology often struggles to address. Intention does not always leave clear material traces. Recent discoveries across South America complicate the picture further. LiDAR surveys have revealed vast ancient cities hidden beneath the Amazon rainforest, proving that pre-Columbian societies were larger, more complex, and more interconnected than previously believed. While this does not validate Rousseau's theories, it does confirm that our understanding of the ancient Americas is incomplete. Marcoussi also possesses unusual acoustic and hydrological properties. Wind passing through the formations produces resonant tones, creating an eerie soundscape. The plateau acts as a natural water collector, channeling rainfall into underground flows that feed valleys below. Some formations align with water sources, suggesting symbolic or practical marking. Local shamans describe the plateau as a place of power. Visitors report disorientation, vivid dreams, and altered perception, effects easily explained by altitude and isolation, but culturally interpreted as spiritual encounters. Volcanic rock often contains quartz and other minerals that can influence electromagnetic readings, further feeding myth and speculation. Perhaps the most unsettling possibility is that Marcoussi was never meant to provide answers. Its power lies in ambiguity. The faces are not clear enough to confirm intention, nor vague enough to dismiss entirely. In a shamanistic worldview, this liminal state is sacred. A rock does not need to be fully carved to house a spirit. Recognition is enough. Whether Marcoussi is geology shaped by time, or time shaped by belief, it confronts us with a difficult truth. Modern science demands clear categories, but ancient people lived comfortably between them. For them, landscape was not passive matter. It was alive, expressive, and responsive. And as we leave the windswept heights of the Andes, the mystery takes a sharper turn. Because the next anomaly does not blur into myth or perception. It collides directly with bureaucracy, records, and military precision. An empire that counted everything somehow lost thousands of men, and left behind almost nothing to explain it. The silence ahead is not geological. It is administrative. We now descend from myth-shaped stone into the cold machinery of empire. The ambiguity of faces and rock gives way to the precision of ledgers, orders, and military discipline. If there is any institution in the ancient world that should leave no mystery behind, it is the Roman army. And yet, even here, history breaks down. The Roman military was not simply a fighting force. It was an administrative organism. Every legion was tracked, paid, supplied, rotated, and documented. Rome did not rely on memory or legend, it relied on paperwork. Names were recorded. Movements were logged. Losses were counted. This obsession with order is what makes the disappearance of one particular unit so disturbing. The 9th Legion, known as Legio IX Hispana, was not obscure. It was elite. Formed in the 1st century BCE, it fought under Julius Caesar and earned distinction in Spain, hence its name. By the time Rome invaded Britain in 43 CE, the 9th was a hardened, experienced force. For decades, it functioned as Rome's northern fist, stationed at Eboracum, modern-day York, guarding the edge of the known world. And then, sometime in the early 2nd century CE, it simply fades out of the record. A Roman legion was not a small unit. At full strength, it consisted of around 5,000 heavily armed infantry, supported by cavalry, engineers, medics, slaves, and camp followers. In total, the 9th represented a moving population of 6,000 to 7,000 people. Losing such a force would be catastrophic. Rome had suffered disasters before, most famously in the Teutoburg forest where 3 legions were annihilated. That defeat haunted Roman memory for generations. Poets wrote about it. Emperors referenced it. Trauma was recorded. But for the 9th Legion there is silence. For centuries, the dominant explanation was simple and dramatic. The 9th marched north into what is now Scotland to suppress rebellious tribes and was ambushed, surrounded, and slaughtered. The mist closed in. No survivors returned. This narrative fits emotionally. It explains why Emperor Hadrian soon ordered the construction of a massive stone wall across Britain, a physical barrier separating Roman order from what lay beyond. But history is not built on what feels right. It is built on evidence. And evidence complicates the story. Roman historians, meticulous in their accounts of victories and defeats, never mention the destruction of a legion in Britain during this period. No speeches. No mourning. No justification. This absence is striking. If thousands of Roman citizens and soldiers had been wiped out, someone would have written about it. Archaeology also refuses to cooperate. Excavations in northern Britain have uncovered signs of conflict, burned forts, weapons, projectiles, but no mass graves consistent with the annihilation of a full legion. The scale does not match the story. Then came a discovery far from the British Isles. In the Netherlands, at a Roman fort near modern Nijmegen, archaeologists uncovered stamped tiles bearing the insignia of the 9th Legion. These tiles can be dated to after 120 CE, years after the Legion was supposedly destroyed in Scotland. This single detail detonated the massacre theory. A dead Legion does not manufacture building materials on the continent. The implication is clear: the Ninth left Britain. This opens a less romantic but more plausible explanation. Rome in the early 2nd century was stretched thin. Major conflicts were erupting in the eastern provinces. Judea, Armenia, and Parthia demanded reinforcements. Legions were transferred, divided, merged, and redeployed constantly. It is entirely possible that the Ninth was withdrawn from Britain, sent east, and slowly bled out through attrition, disease, and desert warfare. A legion did not need to be destroyed in one moment to disappear. It could simply erode. There is also a darker possibility. Roman discipline was brutal. Failure was punished not just with death but with erasure. A legion that mutinied, retreated in shame, or disobeyed orders could be disbanded. Its name struck from rolls. Its eagle confiscated. Survivors reassigned individually so that the unit itself ceased to exist. This practice, known as damnatio memoriae, was Rome's way of rewriting reality. If the Ninth disgraced itself, its disappearance would not be commemorated. It would be quietly absorbed into bureaucracy. Isotope analysis of skeletons found in Roman Britain adds another layer of uncertainty. These remains reveal soldiers from across the empire, Africa, the Balkans, the Mediterranean, but none can be definitively linked to a final stand of the Ninth. There is no closure. No battlefield frozen in time. The Ninth Legion did not vanish into myth. It vanished into paperwork. And that may be the most unsettling outcome of all. Not heroic annihilation but administrative oblivion. Thousands of lives reduced to a clerical decision. A reminder that power does not always destroy loudly. Sometimes it erases quietly. Yet even this bureaucratic mystery pales compared to what comes next. Because now we encounter an object so small, so unassuming, that it should not matter at all. And yet, it threatens to redraw the boundaries of the ancient world. We move from forts and legions to a grave. From iron and discipline to clay and silence. In the early 20th century, an archaeologist working in central Mexico uncovered something that should not exist, and has refused to make sense ever since. The ground was undisturbed. The layers were sealed. The burial was intact. And inside it lay a face from another world. In 1933, while excavating an Aztec-era burial site in the Toluca Valley of central Mexico, archaeologist José García Payan was doing exactly what archaeologists are trained to do. Move slowly, document everything, and trust the layers of soil to tell the story. The grave he was working in was sealed. Its stratigraphy was intact. Nothing had disturbed it since it was closed sometime in the late 15th century, decades before Europeans ever reached the region. Then he uncovered a problem. Buried among unmistakably indigenous artifacts, pottery, ornaments, ritual items, was a small terracotta head. It was no larger than a clenched fist. At first glance it might not seem remarkable. But the longer it was examined, the more impossible it became. The face had a beard, a mustache, a sharply defined nose, deep-set eyes beneath a cap or helmet. These features do not appear in pre-Columbian Mesoamerican art. Indigenous artistic traditions in this region depict smooth faces, broad noses, and stylized features consistent across centuries. Facial hair, especially beards, are virtually absent, not only biologically rare but culturally irrelevant. This head did not resemble Aztec, Maya, or Toltec art. It looked Roman. Art historians who later examined the object reached an uncomfortable consensus. Stylistically, proportionally, and aesthetically, the head matched small Roman figurines produced during the Hellenistic and early imperial periods, particularly around the 2nd century CE. The style was not generic. It was specific. It resembled grotesque or theatrical heads commonly found in Roman domestic contexts. The math was impossible. The burial dated to roughly 1470 to 1500 CE. The figurine appeared to be over 1,000 years older. And it was found beneath sealed floors, ruling out the possibility that it had been planted after European contact. If Payan's notes were accurate, and they were meticulous, then the object was already in the ground long before Columbus sailed. For decades, the artifact sat in museum storage, quietly defying explanation. Many dismissed it as a hoax, a misidentification, or an anomaly not worth confronting. But it refused to disappear. In the 1990s, science was brought in to settle the matter. Thermoluminescence dating was performed on the terracotta. This method measures the amount of stored radiation in fired clay, allowing researchers to determine when the object was last heated in a kiln. When the results came back, they eliminated the simplest escape routes. The clay was ancient. The most probable firing date clustered around the Roman period, roughly the 2nd or 3rd century CE. The object was not colonial. It was not modern. It was not a fake made after European arrival. The material itself belonged to antiquity. This left historians with a choice they deeply dislike: either accept that something extraordinary occurred, or admit that the existing framework cannot account for all evidence. The most conservative explanation is accidental transoceanic drift. Roman ships regularly traveled along the Atlantic coast of Europe and North Africa. If a vessel were blown off course, wrecked, and caught in prevailing currents, debris could theoretically drift across the Atlantic. Oceanographic models show that objects entering the North Equatorial Current near the Canary Islands can reach the Caribbean or Gulf of Mexico within months. The crew would not survive such a journey. But cargo might. Indigenous people encountering the remains of a strange ship, alien bodies, unfamiliar materials, would certainly retrieve objects of interest. A terracotta head, durable and visually striking, could easily be taken inland, traded, reinterpreted, and preserved as a powerful relic. Over centuries, it might lose its original meaning and gain a new one, eventually becoming a sacred object worthy of burial. Another hypothesis proposes indirect transmission. Vikings reached North America around the year 1000 CE. It is conceivable that Roman artifacts looted or collected in Europe centuries earlier traveled north, crossed the Atlantic with Norse explorers, and then moved south through indigenous trade networks that spanned the continent. Ideas and objects traveled far farther than we often assume. There is also the uncomfortable possibility that this is not a one-off event, merely the only survivor. Organic materials decay. Ships rot. Human remains dissolve. If ancient contact occurred even once, the odds of physical evidence surviving are vanishingly small. A single fired clay object might be all that remains. Skeptics argue coincidence. They suggest that a local artisan may have independently produced a face that happens to resemble Roman art. But this explanation collapses under scrutiny. No similar objects have been found in Mesoamerica. Not before. Not after. The head is unique. It is a black swan, a single data point that refuses to fit. And black swans are dangerous to neat timelines. They do not overthrow history by themselves, but they expose its fragility. They remind us that the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. When viewed alongside the other anomalies, the wooden god preserved by chemistry, the industrial statues buried beneath homes, the mountain that may or may not have been sculpted, the legion erased by administration, the terracotta head no longer feels isolated. It becomes part of a pattern. Not a conspiracy. A pattern of loss. Wood rots. Plaster crumbles. Empires censor. Oceans erase. What survives is accidental, incomplete, and misleading. We build narratives from the fragments lucky enough to remain and mistake them for the whole. Taken together, these discoveries do not prove a hidden advanced civilization or rewrite history in a single stroke. What they do prove is far more unsettling. Our picture of the past is radically incomplete. Entire chapters have dissolved. Others were buried intentionally. Some were never written down at all. History is not a continuous story. It is a damaged archive. The ground beneath our feet is not inert. It is a library, most of its books missing, its pages scattered, its language half forgotten. Occasionally, erosion, construction, or chance opens a shelf we were never meant to see. And when it does, the past does not shout. It whispers. It whispers that humans were capable of greatness far earlier than we admit. That progress can be forgotten. That connections existed long before we drew borders. And that what we call impossible is often just something we have not yet learned how to explain. As we close this chapter of the journey, one truth becomes unavoidable. The timeline of human civilization is not a straight line marching forward. It is a tangled web of advances, collapses, reinventions, and silences. History is not finished. It is not even settled. It is waiting, beneath peat, beneath floors, inside stone, inside sealed graves, for the next moment when chance allows us to listen. If the earlier discoveries revealed how much of our past has been lost, erased, or misunderstood, then what follows forces us to confront something even more unsettling. Not just gaps in history but the illusion of certainty itself. Because by the time we reach the final stretch of this journey, one realization becomes impossible to ignore. The problem is not that ancient people were primitive. The problem is that modern humans have grown too comfortable with incomplete answers. We tend to imagine history as a completed puzzle. Most of the pieces, we assume, are already in place. Archaeology, textbooks, timelines, and museums give us the comforting sense that the human story has been mapped, labeled and safely archived. What these anomalies reveal is the opposite. The map is full of blank spaces, and worse, many of the missing regions were never empty to begin with. Consider what links all these discoveries together. Not geography. Not time period. Not culture. What unites them is fragility. Each object or event survived not because it was inevitable but because it was lucky. A wooden statue endured only because it fell into an acidic bog. Plaster figures survived because they were buried and forgotten. Stone faces endure because they blur into geology. A legion vanished because bureaucracy allowed it to. A terracotta head endured because it was fired in a kiln and sealed underground. Survival does not equal importance. It equals circumstance. This realization forces us to re-examine the very structure of history. We do not study the past as it was. We study the past as it accidentally survived. And from that survival, we construct narratives that feel authoritative but rest on a foundation riddled with absence. For most of human existence, stone was not the primary medium of culture. Wood was. Fiber was. Hide was. Paint was. Song was. Ritual was movement, voice, and gesture. None of these preserve well. Entire civilizations may have expressed their deepest beliefs through materials that left no trace. What we call the Stone Age may simply be the surviving stone fraction of something vastly richer. This distortion shapes our assumptions. We imagine early humans as focused purely on survival because survival tools are what remain. But the wooden idol challenges that. It suggests symbolic thinking, spiritual abstraction, and monumental ambition at the very edge of the Ice Age. The plaster statues reinforce it. These were not desperate people scraping by. These were communities investing enormous energy into meaning, memory, and identity. Then there is the question of forgetting. Progress is often portrayed as cumulative, but archaeology repeatedly demonstrates that knowledge can vanish. Techniques are abandoned. Skills are lost. Entire technologies disappear when social or environmental conditions change. The people of Ain Ghazal mastered industrial-scale chemistry and then walked away from it. Humanity did not build up to stone sculpture. It tried, failed, and forgot, only to reinvent it thousands of years later. This should unsettle us because it mirrors the present. We like to believe our knowledge is permanent, stored in servers and satellites. But history suggests otherwise. Complexity does not guarantee continuity. Systems collapse. Records decay. Languages die. What survives may be a fraction, or nothing at all. The mountain plateau in Peru introduces another uncomfortable idea. Perception itself may be part of the archaeological record. Ancient people did not experience the world as inert matter. Landscapes were alive. Rocks watched. Rivers listened. Spirits were not separate from terrain, they were embedded in it. When modern observers argue whether a face in stone is real, they may be asking the wrong question. For a shamanic worldview, recognition is creation. To see a face is to awaken it. This reframes what evidence even means. Not all intention leaves tool marks. Not all meaning requires modification. Some acts are interpretive rather than constructive, and those acts can shape culture just as powerfully as architecture. The disappearance of the Roman legion introduces yet another distortion. Power controls memory. Rome recorded what served it. Silence does not mean nothing happened. It may mean something happened that could not be publicly acknowledged. History is not neutral. It is curated. And then there is the smallest object of all, the terracotta head, which delivers the final blow to certainty. It does not prove ancient global contact. It does not need to. Its existence alone is enough to destabilize the assumption that the ancient world was isolated. Oceans are barriers only if we assume people never failed, never drifted, never survived accidents. Human history is full of unintended journeys. What all of this leads to is not a hidden civilization or a secret chronology. It leads to humility. The past is not a solved equation. It is an ongoing investigation constrained by what little time has spared. Every new discovery has the potential to reorder priorities, shift assumptions, and reopen questions we thought were settled. Archaeology is not about proving what we already believe. It is about learning how wrong we might be. And there is one final truth embedded in all these anomalies. None of them were meant to speak to us. The wooden idol was not preserved as a message. The statues were buried, not displayed. The mountain faces were not labeled. The legion left no final inscription. The terracotta head was not buried to be found. We are overhearing history, not receiving it. The ground beneath us is layered with intention, accident, devotion, fear, ambition, and collapse. Most of it will never be recovered. What remains surfaces only when chemistry pauses decay, when disaster interrupts construction, or when curiosity refuses to look away. So when we encounter an object that does not fit, something too old, too advanced, too out of place, the correct response is not dismissal. It is attention. Because these anomalies are not threats to history. They are reminders of its scale. Human civilization is older, more experimental, more interconnected, and more fragile than we like to admit. The story we tell ourselves is a simplified version, a clean narrative drawn from broken evidence. What lies beneath that narrative is messier, stranger, and far more human. And somewhere, beneath forests, deserts, mountains, cities, and oceans, the next contradiction is already waiting, silent, patient, and completely indifferent to what we think we know. Every civilization believes it stands at the center of history. Every generation assumes it understands the past better than those before it. And yet, the deeper we dig, not just into the ground but into our assumptions, the clearer one truth becomes. Certainty is a luxury history does not offer. What survives from the past is not what mattered most. It is what endured longest. Meaning does not fossilize easily. Belief does not preserve itself. Intelligence leaves no guaranteed imprint. What we inherit is a distorted echo shaped by chemistry, chance, erosion, and power. The wooden figures survived because a bog denied oxygen. The plaster statues endured because they were buried and forgotten. Stone faces persist because they masquerade as geology. A legion vanished because records chose silence. A terracotta head survived because clay remembers fire longer than memory remembers truth. These are not anomalies in history. They are symptoms of it. We do not walk on solid ground. We walk on layers of loss. For most of human existence, knowledge passed through voices, gestures, ritual, and imitation. When those chains broke, entire worlds vanished with them. Languages died without inscriptions. Technologies disappeared without schematics. Cosmologies collapsed without ruins. What we call prehistory may simply be the longest chapter of forgotten sophistication. This does not mean ancient people possessed secret technologies or hidden superpowers. It means they were human, inventive, symbolic, curious, and vulnerable to collapse. Just like us, progress has never been permanent. It surges, fractures, retreats, and re-emerges elsewhere in altered form. History is not a ladder. It is a tide. And the most dangerous illusion modern civilization holds is the belief that knowledge, once achieved, is secure. That our records will last. That our systems are resilient. That our story will be understood. The past disagrees. It shows us cities swallowed by forest. Skills erased by famine. Empires undone by administration. Meanings lost because no one thought they needed explaining. What survives into the future will not be a fair summary of who we were. It will be whatever chance allows. So when we encounter objects that do not fit, when a face stares back from stone, when chemistry outpaces expectation, when timelines refuse to align, the correct response is not fear or fantasy. It is respect. Respect for the scale of human experience. Respect for how much has been forgotten. Respect for how provisional our knowledge truly is. History is not a finished archive. It is an unfinished excavation. And somewhere beneath our feet, beneath cities, seas, and silence, the next reminder is already waiting, not to rewrite the past but to humble the present. Because the greatest lesson archaeology offers is not about ancient people at all. It is about us. Every civilization believes it understands the past better than those that came before it. Each generation assumes that with better tools, better science, and better records, it has finally reached clarity. But history has a way of humbling that confidence. The deeper we look, the more fragmented the picture becomes. Not because the past was simple but because so much of it was never meant to last. What remains from ancient worlds is not a fair representation of who people were, what they believed, or what they achieved. It is merely what survived the longest. Survival is not a measure of importance. It is a product of chemistry, climate, coincidence, and sometimes censorship. Meaning does not fossilize easily. Intelligence leaves no guaranteed trace. Entire systems of knowledge can vanish without warning. The wooden figure endured because oxygen was denied to it. The plaster statues survived because they were buried before their world collapsed. Stone faces persist because they blend into mountains and escape categorization. A Roman legion vanished because power controls memory as much as it controls territory. A terracotta head crossed time because fired clay remembers heat long after humans forget intention. These are not exceptions to history, they are how history works. We like to imagine the ground beneath us as stable, as something solid we stand upon. In reality, it is layered with absence. Each layer represents choices made, stories lost, skills forgotten, and beliefs that once shaped lives but now exist only as shadows. We do not walk on certainty. We walk on accumulated forgetting. For most of human existence, culture was not built to endure. It was lived. Knowledge moved through voices, rituals, gestures, and imitation. Songs carried law. Myths carried science. Bodies carried memory. When those chains broke, through migration, disaster, or collapse, entire intellectual worlds vanished with them. No ruins were left behind. No inscriptions waited to be found. What we call prehistory may not be a time before complexity, but a time whose complexity expressed itself in materials that decay. Wood, fiber, skin, breath. Time erased them all without discrimination. This forces an uncomfortable realization. The narrative of linear progress, of humanity slowly climbing from ignorance to enlightenment, is a simplification. Archaeology repeatedly shows that progress is fragile. It appears, flourishes, collapses, and is forgotten. Knowledge does not move forward in a straight line. It moves in waves. The people who mastered industrial plaster chemistry walked away from it. The skills were lost. The memory dissolved. Thousands of years later, humanity would reinvent similar processes, unaware they were not the first. Innovation does not guarantee permanence. It only guarantees possibility. And this pattern is not confined to the ancient world. Modern civilization is built on the same assumption every past civilization held, that this time knowledge will last. That digital records are permanent. That systems are resilient. That memory is secure. History suggests otherwise. Complexity increases vulnerability. The more intricate a system becomes, the more fragile it is when conditions shift. Empires collapse quietly as often as they collapse violently. Sometimes knowledge is not destroyed, it is abandoned. Sometimes history is not rewritten, it is simply no longer recorded. What the anomalies in this story reveal is not a secret civilization or a hidden chronology. They reveal the limits of certainty. They show us that absence of evidence is not emptiness. It is silence. And silence does not mean nothing happened. It means no one was left to explain it. The past does not owe us coherence. When we encounter artifacts that do not fit our timelines, our instinct is to reject them, to isolate them, to label them anomalies and move on. But anomalies are not threats to history. They are pressure points. They reveal where our models are weakest. They show where assumptions have replaced evidence. The responsible response is not speculation or dismissal. It is attention. Attention to how little survives. Attention to how much has been lost. Attention to the fact that certainty is often an illusion created by incomplete data. Archaeology is not about proving what we already believe. It is about learning how provisional our understanding truly is. Each discovery is not a conclusion, but an invitation to revise. And perhaps that is the most important lesson buried beneath these stories. The past was not waiting to be discovered by us. It was living, breathing, failing, and reinventing itself long before we arrived. We are not its judges. We are its listeners. History does not speak clearly. It whispers. Through fragments. Through accidents. Through objects never meant to last. Somewhere beneath forests, deserts, oceans, and cities, the next contradiction already exists. Silent, patient, and completely indifferent to our timelines. It will surface one day not to rewrite history but to remind us how much of it we never truly knew. Because the greatest lesson archaeology offers is not about ancient people. It is about humility. About understanding that our version of the human story is temporary. That what we believe today may dissolve tomorrow. And that long after we are gone, whatever survives of us will not tell the whole truth, only the part that chance allowed to remain. History is not finished. It is unfinished. And so are we.